So as usual, I fell behind schedule and didn't get this up when I meant to. So there is a part 1 to this video as well, which I'll link in the description below, and I'm hoping to do a part 3, but I think that will be it after that. I'm just pretty much trying to figure out how to keep them all into categories so that I'm just not talking absolute crap. So yeah, for this video I'm going to talk about different techniques and mediums and also experimentation. As I've said before, your style needs to be unique to you no matter what, but there's definitely things you can do to ensure that like you're developing your style and that you're kind of also gearing it towards your future as well. So you could be developing a style that isn't necessarily getting you towards your goals and that you just think is a cool style, and it's kind of up to you whether you want to stick with that style and do something else or change your style to have the kind of future in your career that you want. So for example, you might want to work for like a certain studio or agency. You could be more talented than anyone there, but they still might not hire you because if your style doesn't match up to what they're looking for, it's no good. So I'm going to try and explain this in a bit more detail of how you can kind of like develop your style while thinking about the industry you want to work in and let that kind of influence your style. So for example, if you want to work at a game studio, especially like a AAA game studio, and you're a watercolour artist, there's still a chance that you might get hired, but you're probably not going to unless you're absolutely incredible at what you do. They're probably not going to hire you just because it's not the kind of style that games are usually based on. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely games out there that are based on that kind of stuff, but if you're wanting like a long-term job at a well-known studio, chances are they're going to want you to be good at digital work. It's not just to do with the style either. Obviously when you're working on something like that, it makes the whole process much quicker for everybody. It's easier to edit digital art, it's easier to send to people, it's easier to show it to people on different devices. Like I said, it's not like they wouldn't hire you if you're like a watercolour artist or maybe you did like collage or something like that. It's just that you're less likely to get hired, so just keep that in mind when you are developing a style. Think about the industry you want to get into, any specific companies you want to work for. You can always take a look at what artists they currently work with and see how their style differs but what they have in common as well, and just see if you can pull anything from that. I think everybody should do their own unique thing and have their own style, but if you are looking to get hired at a certain place or produce like a specific style, you do kind of have to keep that in mind while you are developing your style. There's obviously ways the other way as well though, because if you have got like a really unique style, there's so many ways out there that you can make money off your work that you don't need to get hired by anyone else. People will just come to you for your style. So there's a lot of people who are really successful selling their own products, and they might have like a Patreon or something as well, but they're purely successful based on their own style, so they don't really need to worry about anyone hiring them or commissioning them because their followers and customers come to them because they love what they do and the way that they do it. So it can kind of work both ways. It just depends kind of where you want your artwork to go. You could just keep developing your own style and kind of keep it really original and market that, rather than developing your style with the aim of getting a job out of it. But obviously everyone's different, everyone wants to do different things and wants their career to go in different directions, so this isn't even something you need to do, it's just another way to kind of benefit your style and how you develop it. So like another example would be if you wanted to work for someone like Blizzard Entertainment. They obviously have a really recognisable style when it comes to their games. I think it's pretty well known that Blizzard mainly hire artists that already have a style that kind of matches up to theirs. There is the exception where they hire other artists, but it tends to usually be people that are like extremely good at what they do, and they also can kind of adapt to Blizzard's style. Or they tend to have like a new style that Blizzard want to try out with something else, like for example when they do Overwatch comics. But the flip side of that is that there are some studios that don't really hire a specific style, and they give it kind of more towards letting the art influence their game, rather than taking the exact concept art and turning it into a design. So like one example that always stands out for me is Horizon Zero Dawn, because obviously that's kind of like a fairly realistic looking game. It's a little bit stylized, but overall it's very realistic looking. And if you look at the environment concept art for that game, it's really realistic. It's like super detailed digital paintings. But if you look at the character designs for Aloy, they're a lot more stylized. So they were done by Lois, which I'm sure most people know already. But she's kind of like a perfect example of where her style is so unique that that's what's got her hired, rather than her having a certain style that just matches up to the studio. They hired her because she was so good at drawing females, which kind of goes back to like last week's video where I talked about how you have to kind of let your own passions influence you. She obviously really likes drawing females and it shows in her work. People might think, you know, oh, it's boring to just draw one thing, but because that's mainly what she focuses on, that's what she's known for, which is kind of like the best of both worlds really, because she kind of like produces work because she enjoys it, but then she also gets hired for the same thing, so she's always going to be enjoying what she's doing. So like if you look at the concept art for Horizon Zero Dawn and Aloy's character designs, you'll see that they are quite stylized and they don't necessarily look like Aloy in the face. You can kind of tell it's still a character design for her, but like Guerrilla Games have obviously used the concept art to influence the game rather than just taking straight from it. So like on a personal level, there's been quite a few times that clients have come to me and asked for work and then tell me that they're kind of like worried or they're a little bit unsure because my style's quite cartoony. I used to really worry about this, and I used to hate it when clients used to say that because they said it like it was a bad thing. But then I kind of realised that like it's not really, it's a good thing because it's more specific, because that's just kind of part of my style. As long as I'm mainly working on cartoony things, it doesn't really matter. I don't want my style to be more realistic. The more kind of specific you can be, the better really. And as I mentioned in part 1, it's a really good idea to just find artists who inspire you. Like pick a few pieces out that they've done and just try to copy what they do. Don't share these pieces anywhere, they're just kind of for experimentation rather than you actually producing like a final piece. They're more just to learn from. You can also do this by watching videos of them working and just see what their process is. So each time you do this, you'll learn something new and be able to put it in your own work, but you'll also learn what you don't like about their process, and you'll kind of have to find something to replace that. It's a really good way to teach yourself new techniques and develop your work and process a little bit more. Like by doing that, there's always going to be other ways that you differ from their styles as well. Like you could use completely different brushes. Maybe your brushes are like traditional ones that you've scanned in. Or it could be through your use of colour, you might have a completely different colour palette to them. And something else that I think is really, really, really important when you're developing your style, and probably everybody says this, but it's just to experiment. So when I was at college, I insisted that I wanted to be a tattooist. I thought I knew what I wanted to do and I wouldn't really have it any other way. That is what I wanted to do and I was sure of it. So I used to just do a lot of drawing more than anything, I think. Then when I got into my second year, I was kind of like, right, I've really got to try a lot harder this year. I've no idea what I want to do. I've no idea where I want to go with it. I still kind of wanted to be a tattooist, but I knew how hard it was to get into it, and I'd not really tried any other things, to be honest. So I looked a lot into illustration, but I wasn't really sure what it was. So this is when I started to experiment a lot more with paint. I was obsessed with like learning and finding out new things. So I started playing around with painting with coffee, which is something I carried on till the end of the year. And I also used a lot of Posca pens, which not many people were actually using at the time, but they were really fun to play around with as well, and they ended up having a big influence on my work. So I think like the Posca pens, for example, are a big reason why I have really strong line work. It's just something that's always stuck with me. So it's important to experiment with like what tools you use and what materials you use. But I think it's also really important to experiment with kind of like what industry you want to go into. Even if you're not at college and you've kind of got past that and you're just feeling a little bit lost, it's still important because you might be producing work for an area you don't really want to work in. For example, you might be producing concept art for games because that's what you thought you wanted to do. You might be really into games and concept art might really appeal to you, so that's just kind of what you're stuck with. But maybe it's like too detailed, and instead you could try out doing apparel design, and that might be more up your street. It's a bit more simple, you can still be influenced by games, but you might be happier doing something like that instead. So you kind of just have to play around with everything, and even if you don't stick with it, you could literally just experiment for like 5 years and still come back to the thing that you started with, but you can guarantee that you'll at least learn something from it. It'll never go to waste and it's always going to influence your work. It can be really, really hard to experiment. It can be hard to find time for it because, like I said, you can become very kind of stubborn if you think you know what you want to do and there's a certain industry you want to work in. So it can be really hard to like open up or even just know where to start when it comes to experimenting. Not only because it's not what you're used to, but you're probably going to be working in a medium that you're not used to, and it's kind of like you've got to learn it all again. The best thing to do if you are kind of wanting to start experimenting and you don't know where to start is just to kind of dedicate a few hours a week to it. Chances are it will probably make you feel quite good creatively again as well, because it's just a bit of a challenge to learn something new. Again, you can always like copy other artists as well that already work in that medium just to get an idea of how it works and how they use it. Or you could even try and copy someone's work in a different medium. So if you like a watercolour artist, you could copy it digitally. Or if you like a digital artist, you could copy it with pencils. So for example, like you can learn a lot from painting that you can then apply to digital art, because you kind of are just using the same techniques but in a different medium. So like what I recommend doing is something I've done in the past, is either dedicate a few hours to it on a weekend when you've got a bit of spare time, or something that I like to do is spare an hour every morning before you start doing anything else to try new things out. Like I said, it can be hard and it's hard to get into, but it's something worth doing because you will learn a lot from it. Kind of one of them things where you just think it's going to be pointless for me to learn new things, but looking back on it now, even just writing the notes for this video, the experimenting I did in college with like the coffee and the markers and stuff, even though it's not something I use now, it still had a massive influence on my style and my work, and I have kind of still got that traditional skill. I can still draw and I can still paint, but I'd never have thought that I'd still be using like little things here and there in my digital work. And same goes for the first part of this video as well. When I'm feeling a little bit lost and I don't feel like my work's good enough, I think about where I want to take my work and the kind of career I want to have and use that to influence my art. So I do really want to get into game design, so I do try to develop character sheets in my own time, and I've learnt a lot from that, and I'd say that's probably one of the biggest things that has developed my style, and it also means you've got work for your portfolio by the end of it. But I think both of these things help to develop your style, and they also help your output as well. The more that you're doing and the more that you're playing around, the more work you're going to produce. Even if you don't stick with anything that you try out, it's always going to improve your work and you're always going to learn something from it. But I think that's it for this video, so I am hoping to do a part 3. I just need to make some new notes on it. If anyone has anything that they'd like me to cover in these videos, just let me know.